I think we ought to. Let's go.
All right, with that then, our first presentation is by the National Rifle Association, and I'm not really sure who's going to lead that off. We have a speaker, but why don't you come on up and identify yourself? And we have allowed 15 minutes for each group to make their presentations. Go right ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Don Saba. I'm CEO of Sierra Bioresearch. I've stood before you before and spoken on this issue. My organization is a biomedical, veterinary, and human medical consulting and research firm. We do a lot of research in a lot of different interdisciplinary areas, one of which is forensic sciences and environmental sciences, as well as cancer research and AIDS research. Today, you have in front of you a printed version of what I'm going to be speaking about. I urge you to make any notes you wish to make as I'm speaking, and after we're finished, there'll be a test for you all. Okay. I'm here today to talk about the efforts to ban lead ammunition, the evidence that's being used. I'm here to urge caution because a lot of the studies that you've been seeing here that indict lead ammunition are flawed. They're seriously flawed, and I'm going to talk about what those flaws are. So, first I want to start with the points I'm going to cover here. I'm going to start by talking about the AB 821 lead ban, show you why it's ineffective. Then we're going to talk about existing scientific studies, and I'm going to show you why they're flawed. They do not support a lead ban for hunting. Scientific evidence that we do have indicates that hunters' ammunition is not the source of lead exposure to wildlife, and that in fact several alternative sources of lead are present in the environment. So first thing, we started out by analyzing the results of the AB 821 lead ban. We got Condor blood lead measurements from the Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Park Service. We got Condor deaths from necropsies and from the stud book from the San Diego Zoo. We got hunter compliance information from your own department, law enforcement. And here's the beginning of the results here. We've graphed before AB 821 and after AB 821. We've shown you here before AB 821, after AB 821, we've got the years 2005, 6, and 7 before, 9, 10, and 11 after. The green lines here are the blood lead percentages that are in the 0 to 10 microgram per deciliter range. The long yellow ones here, those represent the percentage in the 10, 11 to 50, the slightly elevated range. The orange ones up here, which is hard to see, is orange on this particular presentation, 50 to 100 microliters. Micrograms per deciliter, and then the red, which is the very high toxic levels. You will notice before AB 821, the safe levels fluctuate. You don't really see a big change. After AB 821, you see the biggest change here in the high blood lead levels, the orange and the red. Notice how the small amount percentages of red slowly increased here, and then very much significantly larger increases after AB 821. So what you're seeing here is you're certainly not seeing a decrease in blood lead at all. If anything, you're seeing a slight increase in blood lead after AB 821. Here's Condor deaths. On the left, 2005 and 6, there were no deaths. 2007, 1 death. After AB 821, you've got 5 deaths. Okay, now are we going to conclude from this that passing AB 821 kills condors? Well, I kind of don't think so, but the reverse. All right, now finally we've got this, and this is in deference to Nancy Foley. Since she's retiring, we decided to feature her. This is a little conversation that took place back in 2009. Basically, the result of this conversation was 99% of hunters are complying with AB 821. That is, 99% of hunters are not shooting with lead ammunition. So, results: 1 condor lead death before AB 821, 5 condor deaths after. Percentage of condors exposed to lead before and after AB 821, not really much changed. Percentage of condors poisoned by lead, in other words, those high blood, slightly higher. Usage of lead ammunition by hunters decreased by 99%. So what do we conclude by this? AB 821 is ineffective. It does not reduce. Why? Because hunters' lead ammunition is not the cause of lead exposure and death. There are other sources in the environment that are poisoning condors, and we're going to talk to you about that. Okay, but first we're going to talk here. There are some studies that have been bandied about. These studies supposedly show that we need to ban lead ammunition. We've got the UC Davis Turkey Vulture and Golden Eagle studies. We've got the Santa Cruz lead isotopic ratio studies. We've got Church and Finkelstein, which is just a recent paper. We're going to talk about those. And Hunt et al., which is a bullet fragmentation study. And then we've got Ride Out, which is basically a compilation of what those studies talk about. Okay, start here. UC Davis, Golden Eagle, Turkey Vulture studies. These studies, the premise of these studies was they were trying to correlate blood lead in turkey vultures or golden eagles and hunting. So in one study, they're trying to show a low, medium, and high pig density hunting area. They're trying to show before and after effects. Well, let's jump to point 3, which is kind of amusing, you'll find. They failed to recognize that ammunition bans in Tejon Ranch. They actually were measuring golden eagles in spring of 2008 and fall of 2008. And they thought that since spring of 2008 was pre-AB821, that would be a measure of pre-lead ban blood levels. But the problem is, Tejon Ranch banned lead ammunition January 1st of that year. So what they claim is a pre-ban blood lead levels is actually post-ban. They're comparing post-ban to post-ban. This is embarrassing. This is not solid science. It's shoddy science. They didn't do their homework. But that's not where it stops. That's not where it stops at all. They failed to verify the number of kills that were in the study areas. They had these little study areas, maybe 20-kilometer diameter study areas. And they incorrectly assumed that the hunting intensity in those little study areas was proportional to the whole county. You can't do that. But they did it. And then we got from you guys, from your department, we got hunter kills, which gives us an indication of what was actually going on. Now, of course, it's not perfect. But the high hunting intensity site had the greatest blood lead levels for turkey vultures, but we could verify only one pig taken in that area, only one pig. But in the medium hunting intensity area, which had much lower blood lead levels, they had 14 times the number of hunter-killed pigs. There's no correlation there. Now, we get to talk about isotopic ratios, my favorite. UC Santa Cruz, the 2 studies, the earlier Church study. You heard me talk about the earlier Church study. Those of you who were on the commission when I spoke before, I also published a little rebuttal of that. Let me jump ahead a few because this is going to be hard to follow unless I do. This is the presentation that was made in the Finkelstein 2012 paper. And their basic premise is that these black triangles here, represent pre-release condors with very low blood lead. Notice on this axis here, blood lead increases from very low to very high. And up on this axis here, you've got isotopic ratios. So they're saying these isotopic ratios are associated with low blood lead levels. Now, the premise is that as these condors go out into the wild, they get exposed to lead and they get more lead in their blood, and they disperse in terms of their isotopic ratios. Now, in the Finkelstein paper, they claim that lead ammunition has an isotopic range along here that matches the isotopic range of these here, and that's their basis for conclusion. But the problem is, first of all, lead's not the only thing that has isotopic ratios. We have lead paint. Now, see these up here at the top? These, they allege, are due to lead paint. And they say, well, yes, but lead paint has a narrow isotopic range from here to here. And just coincidentally, the isotopic range of paint, they say, is outside the isotopic range of ammunition. Okay, this is garbage. This is not true. How do we know this is not true? Well, here, I'll advance with this. Evidence that lead paint has a broad isotopic range. This is a quote here from Myra Finkelstein and Donald Smith, the authors. But this is 2003. Back here in 2003, they published this paper. And in this paper, they say, on the basis of limited sampling of the study, there's significant differences in the isotopic compositions of paints. i.e. an isotopic ratio of 0.824 to 0.887. That's a different ratio than they said in their original Finkelstein paper. But more importantly, they say, quote, the differences in paint isotopic ratios are not surprising, since the sources of lead used in the production of paint pigments varied over time and between different paint pigment manufacturers, and critically, they see 46 there. That's reference 46. That's to Michael Rabinowitz. Michael Rabinowitz has done extensive studies of the isotopic ratios in paint because he worked with the paint industry to determine liability for, poisoning of children. You look at those two. Rabinowitz references. They show a huge isotopic range for paint. Not that tiny little ratio that the church people, that Finkelstein and Smith would have you believe is the isotopic ratio. So now what do we do here? We go forward. And here, these are the list of published isotopic ratios. Note what I'm saying here. These are published. They've been peer-reviewed and published. This is established science out there in the field. This isn't my data. This is published data. First, we have Finkelstein et al. They claim an isotopic ratio for lead paint in the Condor zone to be 879 to 914. Finkelstein 2003, however, finds a different range, 824 to 887, which is much broader and incidentally overlaps the ammunition in their Finkelstein 2012 paper. Smith and Guiasta here, 2000, they did a paint study from Santa Cruz houses. This is California houses. 3 houses gave this rather long, broad isotopic range. You'd think these people would know. Smith and Finkelstein, they're the ones who published Finkelstein 2012. They're the ones who are telling you that lead has a very short isotopic ratio, and yet their own papers published show that they know that lead has a broad isotopic ratio. And now we look at Rabinowitz, these 2 Rabinowitz papers. Finkelstein and Smith cited Rabinowitz in several instances. They know about Rabinowitz. Look at this isotopic range. It's huge. Now, maybe that might be hard for you to follow, so we did it for you on the chart here. Now look, this is that Finkelstein chart again, the same chart. But the isotopic ranges here, the purple and the brown, are so broad, I had to go back and add on addendum to the top of their chart and to the bottom of their chart to show you how broad isotopic ratios of paint are. So we've got these 2 huge Rabinowitz papers here, or results here that show long, very broad isotopic ratios. We've got the, here, let me back up a minute. See this green circle here? This is what Finkelstein et al. Claims is the isotopic range for lead paint. And they claim, coincidentally, it's just outside the isotopic range for ammunition. So they claim, see, all these condors here are poisoned by paint, and these condors here are poisoned by all these condors here are poisoned by ammunition, and these condors are poisoned by paint. That's their claim. But the problem is, if you look at their other papers, they know, this one here in particular, this is Guiasta and Smith, these are isotopic ratios taken in California. Just 3 homes had that broad an isotopic range. You're telling me that they can measure just one fire lookout in the whole of the Condor zone, and they're going to claim that you're only going to see a short condensed isotopic range. And yet, when they measure just 3 houses, they got a huge isotopic range. Just this purple here encompasses just about all of these isotopic ratios here for what they claim is ammunition. Now, look at this. We've shown you, and incidentally, in Finkelstein 2012, they've admitted that there is no effect of AB821 on lead ammunition, on Condor blood lead. They really admit there's no linkage between Hunter's ammunition and blood lead. So with that in mind, how can they claim that, well, yes, there really isn't a relationship, but actually there is? So they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. But the real thing is, the evidence of the blood lead data that we got, and that they, of course, analyzed, and they underscored and got the same result as we did, that there is no relation between the Hunter's ammunition and Condor blood lead. So then, obviously, it's something else. And look at their own research shows you what it is. There's lead ammunition with a very broad isotopic range. So, to me, I'm insulted. I would be embarrassed to publish this kind of data and have somebody else point out that all this data, you knew about this. You knew this data existed out there. You know. Look at the purple and the brown ones there. We're talking about somebody went out, Rabinowitz went out and collected paint cans and analyzed the paints, their isotopic ratios. They also analyzed paint pigments. This work really shows a broad isotopic range. So, okay, having beaten that to death, we want to go on to the Hunt fragmentation study.
Excuse me, just as a warning, you have 1 minute left.
Thank you. Hunt fragmentation study, they alleged to have found a relationship between lead ammunition. In the Hunt fragmentation study, they claimed that they found that Hunter's ammunition fragments violently and spews lead fragments all throughout carcasses. They claimed to have measured these bullet fragmentation by X-ray of carcasses that they gathered in the field. But they misled you because they didn't talk to a single hunter in the field. They shot those deer. And they shot those deer and they chose the bullets, and I can prove this to you. They shot those deer with bullets that they tested for years to find the most fragmenting bullets. And then they didn't show you those. I can show you the data. They didn't show where they used .308 Winchester and 7.62 by 39 and 243 and didn't get very many fragments. No. They had to go and pick polymer tip bullets to do this. Okay, my final, and I'm just about ended here.
No, seriously, you need to wrap up.
I'm going to.
Okay, you got 30 seconds.
Alternate sources of lead, condors eat garbage, you got paint chips, you got mining waste, you got soil contaminated. Here's some condors eating paint chips, more paint chips. There's a grizzly bear study that they studied whether grizzly bears were eating carrion and whether they would get higher or lower blood lead levels. The answer is no. Grizzly bears don't have any higher blood lead levels that are tied to hunting season. Finally, we got conclusions. AB 821 doesn't work. Hunter's ammunition is not the cause of lead exposure in condors. Alternate sources are causing it, like paint fragments. Scientific studies that claim that Hunter's lead ammunition is poisoning wildlife are fatally flawed and cannot be relied on. Finally, the broad isotopic range of leaded paint completely overlaps the isotopic ratios of lead ammunition. You can't differentiate between paint and ammunition. Therefore, I'm just urging that you not move forward with a lead ammunition ban, and that you maybe get somebody who understands science to work with you guys to really look at what's going on. If you want, I'll volunteer to help you, and I will not take a fee to do so. Thank you very much for indulging me in running a little bit over time.
Thank you.